The scream of the riverboat's whistle cut through the thick Missouri air, and Fiona Whitmore knew she had exactly 30 seconds before the dining hall would flood with hungry, dusty cowboys fresh from the cattle drives that converged on Riverside, Kansas, in the spring of 1874. She straightened her apron, tucked a loose strand of dark auburn hair back into her bun, and braced herself for the chaos that came with every meal service aboard the Prairie Queen. The riverboat had been her workplace for 3 years now, ever since she turned 18 and needed to escape the suffocating expectations of her father's failing farm 20 miles south of town. Here on the muddy waters of the Kansas River, she found purpose in the rhythm of serving meals, clearing plates, and occasionally breaking up fights between drunk cattlemen who thought their money bought them more than just beef stew and cornbread. The doors burst open, and the familiar stampede began. Men in weathered hats and spurred boots crowded around tables, their voices competing with each other in volume and crude humor. Fiona moved through them with practiced efficiency, balancing plates on her arms and dodging wandering hands with the grace of someone who had learned early that a sharp elbow and a sharper tongue kept most trouble at bay. The dining hall smelled of tobacco, sweat, and the roasted meat that the cook had been preparing since dawn. She worked alongside 2 other women, Martha and Caroline, both older and more cynical about the work than Fiona had yet become. "Table 6 needs their drinks," Martha called out, her voice hoarse from years of shouting over the din. Fiona nodded and grabbed a tray of tin cups filled with weak coffee and watered-down whiskey. She wove through the crowd, depositing cups with automatic precision, barely registering the faces that blurred together into one mass of sunburned skin and unkempt facial hair. These men came and went with the seasons, following work and money across the plains, and none of them ever stood out enough to remember. Or so she thought until she nearly collided with the man at table 8. "Careful there," he said, his hand steadying the tray before it could tip. His voice was different from the others, quieter and gentler, lacking the aggressive edge that usually accompanied every interaction in this place. Fiona looked up, ready to deliver her standard dismissive thanks, but something in his face made her pause for just a fraction of a second. He had brown eyes that crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled often, and there was a tidiness to his appearance that set him apart from the usual rabble. His hair was trimmed, his shirt was clean despite the trail dust on his pants, and he wore his hat pushed back rather than pulled low like he had something to hide. "Thank you," she said curtly, pulling the tray back and moving on before he could say anything else. She had learned not to encourage conversation. Kindness from cowboys usually came with expectations she had no intention of fulfilling. She delivered the rest of her drinks and returned to the kitchen for the next round of plates, pushing the brief encounter from her mind as she focused on the endless tasks that filled her 12-hour shifts. The Prairie Queen ran its route 3 times a week, traveling upriver in the morning and returning in the evening, serving meals to whoever paid the fare. The dining hall was the boat's main attraction, offering hot food and cold drinks to men who spent weeks eating nothing but hardtack and jerky on the trail. Captain Morrison, who owned the boat, ran a tight operation and paid his staff decent wages, which was why Fiona had stayed despite the exhausting work and occasional danger that came with serving alcohol to armed men with short tempers. She finished the lunch service and helped Martha and Caroline clean the tables and sweep the floor. The afternoon lull gave them a brief respite before the evening crowd would arrive. Fiona stepped out onto the deck, breathing in the slightly cooler air that came off the water. The riverbanks were lined with cottonwood trees and scrub brush, and in the distance, She could see the flat expanse of prairie stretching toward the horizon. It was beautiful in its own stark way, this land that demanded so much from those who tried to tame it. "You have an admirer," Caroline said, joining her at the railing. The older woman lit a thin cigar and blew smoke into the breeze. "Table 8 could not take his eyes off you during the whole meal." Fiona rolled her eyes. "They all stare. It means nothing. This one was different. He actually looked respectful about it." Caroline laughed, a dry sound that turned into a cough. "Mark my words, girl, that one will be back." Fiona did not respond. She had heard such predictions before, and they never amounted to anything worth noticing. Men came to the riverboat to eat and drink and brag about their exploits. They did not come looking for meaningful connections with the women who served them. She finished her break and went back inside to prepare for the evening service, putting the conversation and the brown-eyed cowboy out of her mind entirely. But Caroline proved prophetic. The next day, when the lunch crowd surged through the doors, Fiona spotted him immediately. He sat at the same table, table 8, positioned near the window where the sunlight cut through the smoky interior. He ordered the daily special, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, and when Fiona brought his plate, he thanked her with that same quiet courtesy that had caught her attention the day before. "The food here is excellent," he said, looking up at her with a genuine smile. "Better than anything I have had in months." "I will tell the cook," Fiona replied, keeping her voice neutral. She moved to leave, but he spoke again. "My name is Robert Brennan. I work the Henderson Ranch about 15 miles west of here." She hesitated, plate-laden tray balanced on her hip. Giving her name felt like opening a door she preferred to keep closed, but something about his earnest expression made rudeness seem cruel. "Fiona Whitmore. It is a pleasure to meet you properly, Miss Whitmore." He tipped his hat slightly, and she noticed his hands were calloused but clean, the hands of someone who worked hard but maintained his dignity. Then she moved on, servicing the other tables, though she found herself uncomfortably aware of his presence for the rest of the meal. He came back the next day, and the next. By the end of the week, Martha and Caroline had begun to tease her relentlessly about her faithful admirer. And even Captain Morrison had noticed the cowboy who showed up like clockwork for every lunch service, always sitting at table 8, always ordering whatever the daily special happened to be, and always waiting patiently for Fiona to take his order despite Caroline or Martha being available. "You should talk to him," Martha urged during one of their afternoon breaks. "When was the last time a decent man showed interest in you?" "I am not interested in being courted by a cowboy," Fiona said firmly. "I have seen what that life does to women. My mother spent 20 years waiting for my father to come home from whatever job he was chasing, and she died exhausted and disappointed. I want something different." "And what is that?" Caroline asked. "You planning to serve meals on this boat until you are old and gray like me?" Fiona had no answer to that. The truth was she did not know what she wanted beyond the vague sense that it had to be something more stable and secure than what her parents had struggled through. The riverboat job gave her independence and a small room in a boarding house in Riverside where she could live without answering to anyone. It was not a grand life, but it was hers, and she protected it fiercely. Still, she could not help but become curious about Robert Brennan as his daily visits continued into the second week. He never tried to engage her in lengthy conversation, never made inappropriate comments or requests, and never seemed bothered when she remained distant and professional. He simply ate his meal, thanked her kindly, paid his fare, and left. It was unusual enough to be intriguing. On the 15th day of his consecutive appearances, Fiona finally broke her own rule. She had just delivered his plate, and as she turned to leave, she heard herself ask, Do you not get tired of eating the same food every day? Robert looked up, surprise and pleasure evident on his face. The food is good, but I confess that is not the main reason I keep coming back. Heat rose to her cheeks, and she was annoyed with herself for walking into such an obvious statement. I see. I do not mean to make you uncomfortable, he added quickly. I just enjoy seeing you. You move through this chaos with such grace and strength. It is impressive. She did not know how to respond to such a straightforward compliment. Most men either ignored her competence or resented it. I am just doing my job. You do it remarkably well. He paused, then added, would you consider letting me walk you home after your shift sometime, just to talk? No expectations beyond conversation. Every instinct Fiona had developed over the past 3 years screamed at her to refuse. Accepting such an invitation would change the dynamic, would open her carefully constructed boundaries to someone who might try to push through them. But another part of her, smaller and more uncertain, wondered what it might be like to have a conversation with someone who looked at her the way Robert did, with respect and genuine interest rather than hunger or contempt. I finish at 8 o'clock tonight, she heard herself say. The boat docks at the main pier. His smile transformed his entire face. I will be there. She walked away before she could change her mind, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. Martha caught her eye from across the room and gave her an approving nod. Fiona focused on her work for the rest of the service, but her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead, equal parts anxious and curious about what she had just agreed to. The afternoon and evening services passed in their usual blur of activity. Fiona worked with mechanical efficiency, her body performing the familiar tasks while her thoughts wandered. She found herself wondering about Robert Brennan, about what kind of man he truly was beneath the polite exterior. The Henderson Ranch was well known in the area, a successful cattle operation run by a fair-minded owner who paid his workers decent wages and did not tolerate the kind of lawlessness that plagued some of the larger spreads. Working there spoke to Robert's character, or at least to his ability to hold steady employment. When the evening shift finally ended and she had helped clean the dining hall, Fiona removed her apron and smoothed her simple gray dress. She had no fancy clothes, nothing designed to impress, and she refused to pretend to be something she was not. If Robert was disappointed by her plain appearance, then this would be a short walk indeed. She found him waiting at the bottom of the gangplank, hat in hand, looking patient and slightly nervous. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dock, and the air had cooled to a comfortable temperature. Around them, the riverfront bustled with evening activity as other boats unloaded passengers and cargo, and merchants closed their shops along the waterfront street. Miss Whitmore, Robert greeted her, falling into step beside her as she started walking toward the main road. Thank you for agreeing to this. I have not agreed to anything beyond a walk, Fiona clarified, though her tone was less sharp than usual. And you can call me Fiona. Then you should call me Robert. He kept a respectful distance between them as they walked, making no attempt to take her arm or crowd her space. How long have you worked on the Prairie Queen? 3 years. I started when I was 18. She glanced at him. How long have you been at the Henderson Ranch? 4 years. I came to Kansas from Missouri after the war ended. I was looking for work and a fresh start. He paused, then added, I was too young to fight, but I lost my father and 2 brothers to it. When it was over, there was nothing left for me back home. Fiona felt her defensive walls lower slightly at this honest admission of loss. I am sorry. That must have been very difficult. It was a long time ago. I have built a good life here. They turned onto the quieter residential street where Fiona's boarding house stood among similar simple structures. What about you? Do you have family in the area? My father has a farm south of town. We do not speak much anymore. She did not elaborate, and Robert did not press. They walked in silence for a moment before she asked, "Why did you keep coming back to the boat? There are other places to eat in Riverside." Robert stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious and sincere. "The first time I came aboard, I was just looking for a hot meal. But then I saw you working, how you handled everything with such capability and dignity, and I was struck by it. I know that probably sounds strange, being impressed by someone serving food, but there was something about the way you carried yourself that made me want to know more about you. So I kept coming back, hoping you might eventually notice me." His honesty was disarming. Fiona had expected flattery or practiced charm, the tools men usually employed when they wanted something from women. Instead, Robert offered her plain truth, and she found herself appreciating it more than any flowery compliment could have achieved. "I noticed you," she admitted. "You were different from the others, quieter, more respectful. Is that why you finally agreed to talk to me?" "Partially." They resumed walking, and Fiona found herself relaxing into the conversation. "Mostly because you were persistent without being pushy. That is a rare quality." They reached her boarding house too quickly. Fiona stopped at the front steps, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end despite her earlier reservations. Robert stood a few feet away, making no move to come closer or attempt any inappropriate farewell. "Would you allow me to walk you home again?" he asked. "Tomorrow, if you are willing." Fiona considered this. One walk could be dismissed as curiosity. 2 walks would be the beginning of something, an acknowledgement that she was open to whatever this might become. It was a risk, opening herself to the possibility of disappointment and heartbreak. But it was also an opportunity for something she had not allowed herself to want in a very long time: connection. "I finish at 8 o'clock, she said, repeating the same information from earlier, but this time it felt like acceptance rather than uncertainty. Robert's smile returned, warm and genuine. "I will be there. Good night, Fiona." "Good night, Robert." She climbed the steps and entered the boarding house, aware that he waited until she was safely inside before walking away. Through the window, she watched him head back toward the main street, his stride confident and easy. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, appeared in the hallway with a knowing look. "That is a good man," the older woman said without preamble. "I have seen him around town. Works hard, saves his money, does not drink to excess or gamble. You could do worse." "We just met," Fiona protested, though the defense sounded weak even to her own ears. "Sometimes you just know," Mrs. Patterson replied sagely. "My Henry and I had 3 conversations before we were engaged, and we were married 42 years before he passed. When you find someone decent in this world, you hold on to them." Fiona went to her small room on the 2nd floor and prepared for bed, her mind too active for immediate sleep. She thought about Robert's steady presence, the way he listened when she spoke, and the respect he showed without expecting anything in return. She thought about her parents' troubled marriage, her father's constant restlessness, and her mother's quiet resignation. She thought about the life she had built for herself on the riverboat, independent but isolated, safe but lonely. Maybe she allowed herself to think as she finally drifted toward sleep. Maybe taking a chance on someone would not be the worst thing she could do. Robert was waiting at the dock the next evening, and the evening after that, and every evening for the next 2 weeks. Their walks became a ritual, a time when Fiona could shed the armor she wore during her shifts and simply be herself. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams for the future, their opinions on the rapidly changing world around them. Robert told her about his work on the ranch, the satisfaction he found in honest labor and the camaraderie among the ranch hands. Fiona told him about the characters she encountered on the riverboat, the traveling salesmen and gamblers and families heading west to start new lives. "You ever want to travel?" Robert asked one evening as they sat on a bench near the boarding house. It was late June now, and the prairie summer had settled in with its characteristic heat and afternoon thunderstorms. "See what is beyond Kansas?" Fiona considered the question. "Sometimes I wonder what other places are like. But mostly I think about having a home, a real home, not just a room in someone else's house. I want roots and stability. I saw what wandering did to my parents, how it wore them down. I understand that. I want the same things." Robert leaned back, looking up at the darkening sky. "I have been saving my wages. In another year or two, I will have enough to buy some land and start my own small ranch. Nothing as big as Henderson's operation, but enough to support a family and build a life." The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Fiona knew they had reached a turning point in their relationship. They had been walking and talking for nearly a month now, and the question of what came next loomed unavoidable. "Robert," she said carefully, "what are we doing? What do you want from these walks?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I want to court you properly. I want to build toward a future together if you will have me. I know it is soon, and I know you value your independence, but I am falling in love with you, Fiona. I have been since that first day I saw you on the boat." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her with such direct emotional honesty. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. "I care about you too," she admitted, the words feeling both vulnerable and liberating. "But I am afraid. I have seen too many women lose themselves in marriage, give up everything only to be left with nothing." "I would never ask you to give up who you are," Robert said earnestly. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. "I love your strength and independence. I do not want to diminish those qualities. I want to build something with you, not take something from you." "Those are easy words to say now," Fiona replied, though she did not pull her hand away. "But what about when times get hard? What about when you are tired of me working or having my own opinions? Then we will work through it together. I am not promising perfection, Fiona. I am promising partnership." He squeezed her hand gently. "My parents had a good marriage before they died. They respected each other and made decisions together. That is what I want. That is what I saw in my home before the war took it all away." Fiona looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. She thought about the past month, how Robert had shown up every single day without fail, how he listened to her stories and opinions without trying to correct or dismiss them, how he made her laugh and feel valued in ways she had not experienced before. She thought about the alternative, continuing her solitary life on the riverboat, watching other people's stories unfold while never fully participating in her own. "All right," she said quietly. "You can court me properly, but I am not making any promises beyond that yet." Robert's face lit up with joy. "That is all I ask. Just a chance." He walked her to her door, and this time when they said goodnight, he lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was chaste and old-fashioned, and it made Fiona's heart flutter in a way she had never experienced before. Over the following months, their courtship deepened. Robert continued his daily visits to the riverboat for lunch, though now he also came to meet her after every shift. They spent their limited free time together, taking Sunday walks along the riverbank when Fiona had her day off, attending church services, and occasionally joining social gatherings in town. Robert introduced her to some of his friends from the ranch, and Fiona introduced him to Martha and Caroline, who both approved heartily of the match. "About time you let yourself be happy," Martha told her bluntly. "That man is besotted with you. Fiona could not deny it. Robert's affection was obvious in every look and gesture, and she found herself returning those feelings with increasing intensity. She caught herself looking for him in the lunch crowd even before he arrived, and her heart lifted every time she saw him sitting at table 8 with that warm smile. When they were together, conversation flowed easily, and even silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. But as autumn approached and their courtship entered its 4th month, Fiona began to sense a restlessness in Robert. He seemed distracted during their walks, and several times she caught him starting to speak before stopping himself. Finally, one cool October evening, she confronted him directly. "Something is bothering you. Tell me what it is." They were sitting on their usual bench, and Robert had been unusually quiet throughout the walk from the dock. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I have been offered an opportunity. Henderson is selling off a parcel of his land, about 160 acres on the western edge of his property. He is offering it to me at a good price because I have worked for him reliably for so long. But I would need to use all my savings and take on some debt to make it work." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Fiona said, though she sensed there was more to the story. "What is the problem?" "The problem is that if I do this, I will be tied to that land for years, working to pay off the debt and build something sustainable. It would not be fair to ask you to wait while I do that, and it would not be fair to ask you to marry me when I could not provide the kind of security you deserve." Robert turned to face her fully. "I love you, Fiona. I want to marry you. But I do not want you to struggle the way your mother did, waiting and hoping while your husband chases an uncertain dream." Fiona felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of love and frustration and fear. "So what are you saying? That you are choosing the land over me?" "No." Robert grabbed her hands, his expression anguished. "I am saying I do not know how to have both. I do not know how to pursue this dream and also be the husband you deserve." She pulled her hands back, needing space to think. The autumn wind picked up, scattering leaves across the dirt street. Fiona thought about what Robert was really offering, which was not abandonment or selfishness, but rather a man trying to be responsible and honest about his limitations. She thought about her own fears and how they had been shaped by watching her father's failures rather than learning from anyone's successes. "What if you are looking at this wrong?" she said slowly, working through her thoughts as she spoke. "What if it is not about you providing everything while I wait passively? What if we build this together?" Robert looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I have savings too. 3 years of wages with minimal expenses because I live cheaply. It is not a fortune, but it is something." The idea was forming even as she spoke, gaining clarity and conviction. "And I could keep working on the riverboat, at least for a while, to bring in steady income while you develop the ranch. We would both be contributing, both working toward the same goal." "I could not ask you to do that," Robert protested. "To work those hard hours while also trying to manage a household. You are not asking. I am offering." Fiona felt a sense of certainty settling over her. "I do not want to be taken care of like a child, Robert. I want to be a partner. I want to build something that belongs to both of us, that we create together through our combined efforts. That is the only way I would feel secure, knowing I had a hand in making our life rather than just receiving it." Robert stared at her as if seeing her anew. "You are remarkable." "Do you know that? I am practical," she corrected, though she smiled. "So what do you think? Could you accept a wife who works and contributes financially? Could your pride handle that?" "My pride," Robert laughed, the tension breaking. "Fiona, I would be proud to have you as my partner in every sense. If you truly want to do this together, then yes. Yes to all of it. Yes to the land, yes to building a ranch, yes to marriage if you will have me." "Are you proposing?" Fiona asked, her heart racing. I do not have a ring yet, Robert said, suddenly flustered. I was planning to wait to do it properly, but yes. Yes, I am proposing. Fiona Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you be my partner and my wife and help me build a life that belongs to both of us? Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. This was not the proposal she had imagined as a young girl, no grand romantic gesture or carefully planned moment. Instead, it was raw and honest and perfectly suited to the relationship they had built over the past months. It was a proposal based on respect and shared goals rather than empty promises and pretty words. Yes, she said, the single word containing all her hope and fear and love. Yes, I will marry you. Robert pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, feeling his heart race against her chest as he held her close. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the magnitude of what they had just committed to. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling despite the tears on Fiona's cheeks. We should do this properly, Robert said. I should meet your father, ask for his blessing. Fiona grimaced. That relationship is complicated, but yes, I suppose we should try. Though I cannot promise he will be pleasant about it. They made plans to visit her father's farm the following Sunday. Fiona felt anxious about the meeting, knowing her father's tendency toward bitterness and judgment. She had not seen him in over a year, their relationship having deteriorated to the point where both found it easier to simply avoid each other. But propriety demanded the visit, and Fiona wanted to at least make the attempt at reconciliation, even if she had no illusions about its likely success. The week passed in a blur of continued work and excited planning. Fiona told Martha and Caroline about the engagement, and both women celebrated with genuine happiness. Captain Morrison offered his congratulations and assured her she could continue working as long as she needed to. The other regular customers on the riverboat noticed her improved mood and the ring that Robert managed to purchase by the end of the week. A simple silver band with a small garnet stone that caught the light when she moved her hands. Sunday arrived too quickly. Robert borrowed a wagon from the ranch and picked up Fiona at dawn for the 20-mile ride to her father's farm. The autumn landscape rolled past in shades of gold and brown as the sun climbed higher. Fiona found her anxiety increasing with every mile, and Robert seemed to sense her discomfort. Whatever happens, it does not change anything between us, he assured her, reaching over to take her hand. We are committed to each other regardless of your father's opinion. I know, but I would like his blessing even if I do not need it. Fiona sighed. He is difficult and stubborn, but he is still my father. Some part of me still wants his approval. The farm appeared on the horizon, looking more run down than Fiona remembered. The barn needed repairs, the fences were falling apart, and the field showed signs of neglect. Her father emerged from the house as the wagon pulled up, his face weathered and suspicious. He had aged considerably in the year since she had seen him last, his hair now fully gray and his frame thinner than it should be. "Fiona," he greeted her curtly. "What brings you out here?" "Hello, father." She climbed down from the wagon, Robert close behind her. "This is Robert Brennan. He has asked me to marry him, and we wanted to speak with you about it." Her father's eyes narrowed as he looked Robert up and down, assessing him with the critical gaze of someone determined to find fault. "Another cowboy. I suppose you think that is a step up from serving them on that boat." "Father, please," Fiona said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Robert is a good man. He works hard and has saved enough to buy his own land. We are building a future together." "Building a future," her father scoffed. "That is what I thought I was doing too, and look where it got me, working myself into an early grave on this worthless dirt." Robert stepped forward, his voice respectful but firm. "Sir, I understand your concerns." but I love your daughter, and I am committed to providing for her and treating her with the respect she deserves. I am not asking your permission, as Fiona is her own woman, but we would both appreciate your blessing." Fiona's father stared at Robert for a long moment, and she could see the bitter thoughts working behind his eyes. Finally, he spat into the dirt and shook his head. "Do what you want. You will anyway, but do not come crying to me when it all falls apart. Marriage is hard work on top of hard work, and land is never as profitable as you think it will be." It was not a blessing, but it was as close as they were likely to get. Fiona felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. She had hoped for more, but she had expected exactly this. "Thank you for your time, Father. We should be going." They did not linger. The ride back to Riverside was quieter than the journey out, both of them processing the encounter. Finally, Fiona broke the silence. "I am sorry he was so unpleasant." "You have nothing to apologize for," Robert replied. "He is angry at his own life, not at you or me. I understand that kind of bitterness. I saw it in a lot of men after the war, people who felt cheated by how things turned out. I will not let his cynicism poison what we are building," Fiona declared. "We will make different choices and create a different outcome." "I believe that," Robert said, squeezing her hand. "I believe in us." They set a wedding date for early December, giving themselves time to finalize the land purchase and make basic preparations for their married life. Robert completed the negotiations with Henderson and officially became the owner of 160 acres of Kansas prairie. The land came with a small, rough cabin that would need work, but provided basic shelter. Fiona contributed her savings as promised, and together, they drew up plans for how they would manage the finances and work during the first critical years. The wedding took place on a cold Saturday in the first week of December, in the small church in Riverside with Martha, Caroline, and several of Robert's ranch friends in attendance. Captain Morrison gave Fiona away, and the local minister performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. Fiona wore a new dress in deep blue, and Robert wore his best suit. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, Fiona felt a certainty she had never experienced before. This was right. This was the beginning of something strong and true. The wedding celebration was modest, a dinner at the church hall with food prepared by the ladies' auxiliary. There was music and dancing, and Fiona found herself laughing more than she had in years, held close in Robert's arms as they swayed to the fiddle tunes. When the evening ended, they traveled by wagon to their new home, the cabin on their land that would be their starting point. The cabin was crude but sturdy, one large room with a stone fireplace and a sleeping loft accessed by a ladder. Robert had spent the past weeks making it as comfortable as possible, adding a proper door, fixing the roof, and building simple furniture. It was not much, but it was theirs, built by their combined efforts and paid for with their shared resources. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," Robert said as he carried her over the threshold, a traditional gesture that made Fiona smile despite her usual practicality. "It is a good home," she replied, looking around at the simple space. "It is ours." That night, in the warmth of the firelight and the comfort of their marriage bed, they came together as husband and wife. Robert was gentle and patient, and Fiona found herself responding to his touch with a passion she had not known she possessed. They learned each other slowly, finding rhythm and pleasure in the intimate discovery of their joining. When they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms beneath heavy quilts, Fiona felt a peace and contentment that made all her earlier fears seem distant and unimportant. The next months tested them in ways they had anticipated, and some they had not. Fiona continued working on the riverboat, rising before dawn to make the ride into Riverside and returning after dark to help Robert with whatever needed doing on the ranch. Robert worked from sunup to sundown, clearing land, building fences, and preparing for the cattle they planned to purchase in the spring. They both worked harder than they ever had, collapsing into bed each night exhausted but satisfied with their progress. Winter was harsh, with storms that buried their cabin in snow and temperatures that dropped so low the water froze in its bucket overnight. They huddled together for warmth and ate simple meals of beans and salt pork, saving their money for the spring investments that would determine their success or failure. There were moments of discouragement, times when the endless work and deprivation seemed overwhelming, but they faced those moments together, supporting each other through doubt and fatigue. In early spring, using their combined savings and a small loan from the bank, they purchased 20 head of cattle and 2 horses. It was a modest start, but it was a start. Robert spent his days tending the animals and continuing to improve the property, while Fiona maintained her riverboat schedule. They saw each other mostly in the early mornings and late evenings, stolen hours that they protected fiercely, talking about their days and making plans for the future. By summer, Fiona realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought a mixture of joy and anxiety. A child would complicate their careful financial planning and add another layer of work to their already demanding lives. But it also felt like confirmation that they were building something real and lasting, a family to inhabit the home they were creating together. "We will make it work," Robert assured her when she told him the news. His hand rested gently on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "We have made everything else work. This is just the next step." Fiona worked on the riverboat through her 7th month, ignoring the concerned comments from Martha and Caroline about her stubborn refusal to rest. They needed the money, and she was healthy and strong. But finally, Captain Morrison insisted she take leave, concerned for her safety and that of the baby. Fiona reluctantly agreed, spending her final weeks of pregnancy focusing on the ranch and preparing for the child's arrival. Their son was born on a frigid January night in 1876, delivered by a local midwife with Robert pacing anxiously outside the bedroom they had added to the cabin the previous fall. The labor was long and difficult, but when Fiona finally heard her baby's first cry, the pain seemed insignificant. Robert came in moments later, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Robert whispered, awe evident in his voice. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." They named him Samuel, after Robert's father, and the baby brought a new dimension to their lives. Fiona discovered reserves of love and patience she had not known existed, while Robert proved to be a devoted father who helped with every aspect of the baby's care. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and content, and he thrived on the milk and attention his parents provided. Fiona returned to the riverboat when Samuel was 3 months old, leaving him with Mrs. Patterson during her shifts. The boarding house owner had become a grandmother figure to them both, and she doted on the baby with obvious affection. The arrangement worked well enough, though Fiona found the separation difficult and counted the hours until she could return to her son. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. Their cattle herd increased through careful breeding and strategic purchases, and Robert's reputation for quality stock began to spread through the region. By the time Samuel turned 2, they had paid off their debt to the bank and were operating entirely on their own capital. Fiona was able to reduce her hours on the riverboat, working only 3 days a week rather than 6, which gave her more time with Samuel and more opportunities to contribute directly to the ranch work. Those years were hard but good. Fiona and Robert worked in partnership, making decisions together and supporting each other through challenges and setbacks. There were droughts that tested their water supply, harsh winters that took some of their cattle, and market fluctuations that affected their income. But there were also years of plenty, seasons when everything came together perfectly, and their hard work paid off in tangible success. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping his father with the animals and following his mother around the house and garden. When he was 4, Fiona gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma. The pregnancy had been unexpected but welcome, and Emma proved to be a spirited child with her mother's determination and her father's gentle nature. By the time Emma was walking, Fiona had stopped working on the riverboat entirely. The ranch was profitable enough to support them comfortably, and she wanted to focus her energy on their children and the expanding operation. She had no regrets about her years on the Prairie Queen. The experience had shaped her and taught her resilience, but she was ready for this new chapter that centered on the life she and Robert had built together. Robert continued to work tirelessly, but now he had help. He hired 2 ranch hands, young men looking for steady work and willing to learn the cattle business. The extra labor allowed Robert to take on more ambitious projects, including breeding programs that improved their stock quality and fetched higher prices at market. He also began buying additional land when neighboring parcels became available, gradually expanding their holdings. The cabin that had seemed adequate when they first married eventually became too small for their growing family. When Samuel was 6 and Emma was 2, Robert began building a proper house, a 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a separate kitchen, and a front porch where they could sit in the evenings. The construction took nearly a year, and Robert did much of the work himself with help from their ranch hands and some hired carpenters for the specialized tasks. Fiona planted flower beds around the new house and established a large vegetable garden that provided much of their food. She kept chickens for eggs and meat, and she learned to preserve and can the harvest to carry them through the winters. The skills her mother had tried to teach her years ago, skills she had resented and resisted, now became essential tools for maintaining their household. In 1883, when Samuel was 7 and Emma 5, Fiona gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas. The family felt complete with 3 healthy children and a thriving ranch that had grown to nearly 400 acres through strategic purchases. They were not wealthy by the standards of the large ranchers who dominated the territory, but they were comfortable and secure, which was more than many could claim. Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and satisfying. The children grew and took on age-appropriate responsibilities around the ranch. Samuel showed a natural aptitude for working with animals and seemed destined to follow in his father's footsteps. Emma was more interested in the domestic side of ranch life, but also displayed a fierce independence that reminded everyone of her mother. Thomas was still too young to show clear preferences, but he was a happy, energetic child who kept everyone entertained with his antics. Fiona and Robert's relationship deepened as the years passed. The passionate romance of their courtship had evolved into something more profound, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared labor, and unwavering commitment. They still found time for each other despite the demands of raising children and running a ranch, stealing moments of privacy and affection when they could. Their love had weathered the tests that Fiona had once feared would destroy it, proving that her trust in Robert had been well-founded. One evening in late summer, after the children had been put to bed and the ranch work was done, Fiona and Robert sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. It was their favorite time of day, the brief window between the end of work and the beginning of sleep, when they could simply be together without demands or interruptions. "You remember the first time I came to the riverboat?" Robert asked, his arm around Fiona's shoulders. "I was so nervous. I had no idea if you would ever even notice me." Fiona laughed softly. "I was determined not to notice you. I thought I had my life figured out and did not need anyone complicating it. I am glad you changed your mind. So am I." She leaned into him, content and peaceful. "We have built a good life, Robert, better than I ever imagined possible." "We built it together," he corrected. "That is what makes it good. We both contributed and we both benefit." That simple exchange captured the essence of what they had created. It was not a fairy tale romance or a perfect existence free from struggle and sacrifice. It was something more valuable, a real partnership based on equality, respect, and genuine love. They had taken their individual strengths and combined them into something stronger than either could have achieved alone. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a capable young man who worked alongside his father, learning every aspect of ranch management and preparing to eventually take over the operation. Emma surprised everyone by developing an interest in horses and becoming an accomplished rider and trainer, earning money by breaking and training mounts for other ranchers. Thomas showed academic inclinations and talked about becoming a teacher, which his parents supported despite knowing it would take him away from ranch life. Fiona stayed involved in the ranch operations, but also became active in the community. She helped establish a school in Riverside and served on the church committee that organized aid for families struggling with poverty or illness. Her experience working on the riverboat had given her insights into the hardships faced by many frontier families, and she used her relative stability to help others whenever possible. Robert's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher continued to grow. He was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association and helped negotiate better terms for small ranchers dealing with the big railroad companies. He never forgot what it was like to be a hired hand with nothing but dreams and determination, and he treated his own employees with the respect and fairness he had appreciated from Henderson years earlier. In 1890, Samuel married a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and Fiona and Robert became grandparents the following year when their first grandchild, a girl named Alice, was born. The arrival of the next generation felt momentous, a confirmation that the family and legacy they had built would continue beyond their own lives. Emma married at 22 to a horse breeder from western Kansas, and they established their own ranch focused on breeding and training quality mounts. Thomas did become a teacher, moving to Kansas City after completing his education and finding work in the growing urban school system. All three children maintained close relationships with their parents, visiting regularly and staying connected despite the distances and demands of their own lives. As Fiona and Robert entered their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the most physically demanding ranch work, hiring managers to handle the daily operations while they focused on strategic decisions and financial planning. They had built something that could sustain itself without their constant direct involvement, which was exactly what they had worked toward all those years. One afternoon in the summer of 1898, Fiona found herself back at the riverside in Riverside, though she had not been there in years. The Prairie Queen had been retired a decade earlier, replaced by more modern vessels and eventually made obsolete by the expanding railroad network. But the dock remained, and Fiona stood there remembering the young woman she had been, serving meals and guarding her heart against the possibility of love. Robert found her there, having followed when she wandered away from their shopping errands in town. He came to stand beside her, looking out over the water that moved sluggishly in the summer heat. "Thinking about the old days?" he asked. "Thinking about how much has changed," Fiona replied. "I was so certain I had everything figured out. I was going to stay independent and safe, never risk being hurt or disappointed. And then a persistent cowboy kept showing up for lunch," Robert said with a smile, "and I finally noticed him." Fiona turned to face her husband, seeing the gray in his hair and the lines on his face that came from decades of outdoor work and laughter. She saw the man who had patiently courted her, who had respected her boundaries while showing her what love could be, who had partnered with her to build a life that honored both their strengths and dreams. "I love you," she said, the words still carrying weight even after 24 years of marriage. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I love you too," Robert replied, pulling her into his arms, "and I never could have given up. You were worth every meal I ate on that boat, worth every moment of uncertainty and waiting. You were worth everything." They stood together in the summer sunshine, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. Around them, Riverside continued its slow transformation from frontier town to established community. But the essential qualities that had brought Fiona and Robert together remained unchanged. Hard work, honesty, respect, and love had been enough to overcome fear and create a partnership that had weathered every storm. That evening, they returned to their ranch where the next generation was already taking over, where grandchildren played in the house they had built with their own hands, where the land they had tended together spread out in all directions as testament to what could be achieved through combined effort and unwavering commitment. In the years that followed, Fiona and Robert enjoyed a peaceful retirement, watching their children and grandchildren thrive and continuing to contribute to their community in smaller but meaningful ways. They took trips to visit Thomas in Kansas City and Emma at her horse ranch. They spent long afternoons playing with their growing number of grandchildren and teaching them the stories of how their grandparents had met and built the family legacy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and dozens of friends from across the region, Fiona and Robert renewed their vows in the same small church where they had married. It was Samuel's idea, supported enthusiastically by Emma and Thomas, and though both Fiona and Robert initially protested that such fuss was unnecessary, they were secretly touched by the gesture. Standing before the same minister who had married them 3 decades earlier, now aged and gray but still officiating weddings and baptisms, Fiona looked into Robert's eyes and spoke from her heart. "30 years ago, I promised to be your partner and your wife. I did not fully understand what that would mean, what challenges we would face or what joys we would share. But you have honored every promise you made to me. You have respected my strength, supported my dreams, and loved me through every season of our lives together. I would make the same choice again without hesitation. I love you more today than I did then, which I would not have believed possible." Robert's voice was thick with emotion when he responded. "I saw you on that riverboat and knew my life would never be complete without you in it. You have exceeded every hope I had, every dream I allowed myself to imagine. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend, and the mother of my children. You have made me better than I could have been alone. I promise to love you for whatever years we have left, just as I have loved you for the past 30. There was not a dry eye in the church. Their children stood as witnesses to this recommitment, and their grandchildren, though not fully understanding the significance, sensed the importance of the moment. The celebration that followed was joyful and heartfelt, a community gathering to honor a marriage that had become a model for what commitment and partnership could achieve. Fiona and Robert lived well into the new century, watching the 20th century bring changes they could never have imagined in their youth. Automobiles began to appear on the roads, electricity reached rural areas, and the wildness of the frontier gradually gave way to established civilization. Through all these changes, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. When Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Fiona grieved deeply but did not break. Their life together had given her strength and purpose that endured beyond his physical presence. She lived another 3 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, writing down the stories of their lives so that future generations would know where they came from and what values had built their family. She passed away quietly one spring morning in 1909, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch Robert had built, looking out over the land they had tended together. Her children found her there, peaceful and content, her hand resting on a letter she had been writing to her youngest grandchild about the importance of finding someone who would be a true partner in life. The ranch continued under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children and their children. The house Robert built still stood decades later, maintained and cherished as the family home where multiple generations had been raised. The story of Fiona and Robert became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what love should be: respectful, equal, committed, and strong enough to weather any storm. In Riverside, where a historical society eventually formed to preserve the town's frontier heritage, stories of the Prairie Queen and the people who had worked there became part of the local history. Though most details were lost to time, a few elderly residents still remembered Fiona Whitmore, the capable young woman who had served meals with such dignity and strength. They remembered Robert Brennan, the cowboy who had courted her with patient persistence until she finally noticed him. But the full story, the intimate details of their courtship, their struggles, their triumphs, and the deep love that sustained them through decades of partnership, that story lived on in the hearts and memories of their descendants. It was a story not of grand gestures or dramatic events, but of two people who found each other, chose each other, and built a life together through consistent daily choices to honor their commitment and love each other well. It was, in the end, a story worth telling. Not because it was extraordinary or unusual, but because it was real. It was the story of how love could flourish even in harsh conditions, how partnership could achieve what neither individual could accomplish alone, and how a chance encounter on a riverboat could change the trajectory of two lives forever. The sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, just as it had on thousands of evenings throughout Fiona and Robert's life together. The land they had claimed and cultivated continued to support their descendants, a living testament to what they had built. And somewhere in the collective memory of their family, in the values passed down through generations, in the model of partnership and respect that shaped how their children and grandchildren approached their own relationships, Fiona and Robert's love story continued, eternal and unchanging, a legacy more valuable than land or wealth or any material inheritance. Their story had begun with a young woman determined to protect her independence and a young man willing to wait patiently until she was ready to risk her heart. It had unfolded through years of shared labor, mutual support, and unwavering commitment. It had weathered every test and emerged stronger, proving that true partnership, built on respect and equality and genuine love, could create something that lasted not just for a lifetime, but for generations beyond. And so their story ended not with death, but with continuation, their love multiplying and spreading through their descendants, their example lighting the way for others who sought to build something real and lasting in a world that often seemed to value momentary pleasure over enduring commitment. They had lived well, loved fully, and left behind a legacy that honored both of them and the remarkable partnership they had created together from that first moment when she finally noticed the cowboy who kept coming back, and he saw the woman worth waiting for.